This is Health Call Online, the place for extended versions of interviews featured in our weekly radio broadcast, the Health Call Radio Hour, now heard across the country in national syndication. So yeah, I think we all have at least one, and if you're lucky, it's a good friend. But for many people, that little voice in their head is just overly critical, a constant negative companion. Just who is this voice? Should you ignore it? Can you try to control it? Can you turn it from being that worst critic into your best friend? Eager to talk about that today with our guest, Rachel Turow. She is a PhD, a professor, psychologist, and author of a book called The Self-Talk Workout: 6 Science-Backed Strategies to Dissolve Self-Criticism and Transform the Voice in Your Head. I am so glad you're here, eager to talk with you about all of this.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me today.
You bet. Okay, let's start with the question I posed just a moment ago. Who is this voice in our head? Where does this come from?
Well, it's learned from our environment. We all have a relationship towards ourselves, and we often don't choose it intentionally. We sort of soak it up. It looks like there are a lot of factors influencing how we relate to ourselves, our thoughts, our feelings, how we saw other people relate to themselves, the modeling that we've observed, and also environmental influences. Anybody who's been mistreated, bullied, who's experienced racism or homophobia, or very critical parents or coaches, people are in our environment who've criticized us, we soak that up. Even if we know it's wrong, it can get under our skin. And now we know too that exposure to social media makes people more self-critical. And we have a very competitive culture where there is this learning that we're going to compare ourselves to other people around us, try to compete. And some of that is, just to be expected, like if you need to get a spot in an orchestra or a spot on the team. But it can become a way of life where we're just constantly evaluating ourselves and really being mean to ourselves. And it's associated with a lot of mental health difficulties if we're overly self-critical.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that. How often is this a factor in cases of, severe depression, anxiety, crippling kind of emotional problems?
Quite often, the research is very strong that self-criticism worsens mental health in a variety of domains. It's associated with higher levels of anxiety, depression, stress, post-traumatic stress, substance use, eating disorders, and self-harm.
Wow. So don't I need somebody to be giving me a little kick in the pants and, little encourage, well, not encouragement, but, some incentive to move forward? Isn't that a good thing?
Yeah, that's a really fascinating question, right? Isn't some self-criticism valuable or necessary? I think so, but it depends on how you're speaking to yourself. So I think it can be done in an encouraging way. If you notice that your behavior isn't matching your values, you're not reaching out to your friends as much as is important to you, or you're not taking as good care of your body, your health, as you know that you should, you can notice that and sort of criticize it, but maybe with an aim of encouragement. Okay, this isn't quite matching up to where I want it to be. How can I help myself? What kinds of activities and actions can I take to make this more consistent with how I want to be? That's really different than saying, oh, I'm a terrible person because I haven't returned my friends' phone calls. I'm awful. Now they really don't want to hear from me because I waited a week. It's useless. So that's a really different style. Both are kind of critical, but one is more planful and encouraging, action-oriented, and kind of like, yeah, you can do it. Whereas the other one is, no, you can't do it. This is just awful.
My show is, this program is listened to by folks. Generally, I'm going to say 45 plus is the core of our audience. That's a lifelong habit we've all learned. Is it ever too late to break that chain?
Well, Lee, I'm really glad you brought it up like that. It is a habit. People sometimes think that self-criticism is like a stable trait, like your height or your eye color. But the evidence shows that it can be changed, that it is a habit, it's a very powerful habit, but sort of like smoking in that it impacts a vast array of health experiences. But there is actually evidence showing how you can make those changes. And there's also evidence showing that even if you think the self-criticism is motivating, it's linked with more procrastination and less motivation.
We're going to get into your 6 strategies a little bit later on. I want to hear some real positive kind of try this steps. So we'll do that in just a second. So give me an idea of where people go off the rails. One of the things I've heard of is catastrophizing. Tell me more about that.
Well, catastrophizing is basically worrying about what could go wrong. And I wouldn't want anybody to blame themselves for doing this. This is part of what keeps us alive, right? Is to kind of be attuned to possible threats. You have to make sure that you're taken care of, that you pay your rent or mortgage, and that you make sure that you get your car checked out. You want to make sure that you're paying attention to the stuff that could go wrong. The trouble comes when that takes all of our mental attention, or when we go too far thinking about what could go wrong that we can't really enjoy this moment. And it's hard to just say, like, oh, sure, I'd like to have a balance. I don't want to be thinking about the bad stuff all the time. That intention is really lovely, but the evidence shows that beyond the intention, it's the actual practice, kind of like going to the gym, that really makes a difference. The regular practice of different mental activity.
I heard you in another interview describe teaching a bunch of basketball players some of your key concepts, and I thought that was very interesting. Can you share that story again for us here?
Absolutely. So the first mindfulness class that I taught at Seattle University, I didn't know, but most of my class was basketball players. It was summer session, and they were required to be enrolled in a class on campus during the summer, during their practices. Or maybe they were just really interested in mindfulness. That's cool too. But it was a real lesson for me in how these skills are applied in different arenas. So for the basketball players, they were thinking about, well, how is this going to affect my game? And they had a lot of self-criticism for the things that, hadn't gone right. And some of that self-criticism was keeping them stuck in their mind and making them less present for the next minute of the game. But by practicing different mindfulness and self-compassion skills, they found that they could reduce that self-criticism so that they could still pay attention to, okay, what they needed to grow and develop, and maybe parts of their technique that they could change, but with less self-hatred. So they experienced hating myself less on the court, less focused on the last play, and more focused on what I'm doing right now in this play.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of lessons in that for all of us. And another one that I took away from that experience for you was how important it is to practice and repeat these techniques that we're just about to talk about, and what the basketball players taught you about the importance of that.
Absolutely. I even asked them, like, I'm not really good at basketball. How many times would I need to, practice taking a shot to get good at it? Like 50? 100? And they, laughed at me, because the right answer is like, no, it's like 10,000. The more you do it, the better you get. And the same is true for working with your mind. If you just want to ruminate less and hate yourself less, that's great. But it's really the practice over and over again. And once you do it a few times, it becomes easier, kind of like any other kind of workout.
Okay, well, let's start that workout. Let's get in our sweats and see what we can get done here, all right? So, I keep thinking that when those voices start, if you could just scratch the record, if you could put a big old scratch on that CD and just stop it, then that's a step forward. Does that work?
Maybe it does for some people, but the problem is trying to suppress, squash, kill, silence your inner critic. Sometimes it can make those voices come back stronger. And you can understand that, especially if those voices are arising from something that is important to you, like taking care of your health or nourishing your relationships. If you try to push that away, you're like, no, that's really important. But I understand too, if the self-criticism is just like internalized years from, internalized voices from bullies or from critical parents, it's not so useful. But I think that it's really about dissolving it with kindness. So building an adversarial relationship with your inner critic, like squashing your inner critic, silencing it, maybe some people have a good experience with that, but you can see that the issue is that it's more self-criticism. Now I'm going to beat up my inner critic, right? You're still beating
Yeah.
yourself up because it's inside of you. So another approach would be to just kind of pour on the understanding and compassion. Like, yeah, I totally get that you're reflecting these years of input, but that's not the direction I'm heading right now. I'm going to be more encouraging. So thanks for that information. Or, yeah, thanks. I get that this could go wrong. Or, thank you. I know you're trying to look out for me. It's just, I'm going to focus on this other area. And it's that kind of just gentle relationship with your inner critic that seems to nourish kind of that overall more compassionate, more encouraging, friendlier relationship within yourself towards your own thoughts and feelings.
Okay, so it sounds like the first step is just awareness. Be aware that it's happening and that this voice isn't really you, it's something else. Do I have that right?
Yeah, it's a habit. It's a habit, just kind of like smoking. You might not have noticed though that when you picked it up or how you picked it up, but it's really common and you can change it.
Okay, so I'm aware. I'm aware that it's
Mhm.
happening now. What's next?
Well, you have some choices in how you handle it. So it's not one size fits all. One of the first exercises that I usually suggest is one called Spot the Success. This is tuning in to 10 actions that you've taken today to help yourself or someone else or the world. And there's no limit to how small they can be. These are things we usually discount as no big deal, kind of everyday sort of stuff.
Mhm.
But the problem is we're often focused on what we haven't accomplished today. I never have a day where I'm like, I finished everything I've ever wanted, everything is accomplished.
Yeah.
But marinating in that feeling of inadequacy, of, oh, I didn't get this done, I didn't get that done, that can really drag a person down. So the Spot the Success exercise invites you to list either in your mind or on paper these 10 things. Got out of bed, wrote an email, took out the garbage. And what my students find is that tuning into those successes might seem kind of silly at first, but that practicing it can generate more of a feeling of motivation. Like,
Now
yeah, I'm a,
I
you know,
gotta tell you, it feels a little fluffy to me. Like, is that really going to
right.
make a difference in my life?
And some of these exercises will feel a little bit corny. We have a lot of skepticism, but this exercise is a form of cognitive reappraisal or seeing the same situation in a different way. And that skill is associated with less depression. It's not a big cost to spend a minute thinking about your successes, even if it feels silly. So it's an interesting experiment to try for a week or so. And my students say that it leads to more motivation or feeling a little bit happier with themselves.
Okay, so accept a victory when you have it. Okay, I get that. I love that phrase that you
Mhm.
just used too, marinating in your inadequacy. That hits with me. I'm gonna take that one away. That's a good one.
You
Okay,
can do the
next.
opposite too. You can marinate in the victories.
Yeah, there you are.
Mhm.
Okay, see, flip it around. I think that's
Yeah.
a great strategy. Okay, next, what else is on your list?
Well, I do have some breathing type of exercises that, think a little bit about how these feelings reside in your body. There's wonderful evidence that mindfulness meditation, which is paying attention to this moment on purpose with a spirit of curiosity rather than judgment, that a regular practice of actually sitting down to do that for several minutes most days is associated with all sorts of mental health and physical health benefits. And one of the mechanisms seems to be non judgment,
Hmm.
practicing non judgment. And a lot of people will hear this idea of meditation and have a reaction to it. I
Yeah, it's a
didn't like
little
meditation
woo-woo,
when
right? It's a
I tried.
little, yeah, it's a little
It can seem that
California.
way, but
Yeah.
there's so much great evidence right now. We have the benefit now of thousands of research studies showing that, 3 to 8 weeks of trying this out results in meaningful changes for most people. Not everyone, but
Now
most
that's
people.
great because I've played with mindfulness and meditation, and I just can't get there. It seems like I just don't stop all the noise in my head. Is that so? I just need to keep after it.
Well, where are you trying to get?
Just a sense of quiet. You know, like
Mhm.
so many people,
Mhm.
my brain is always awash with sometimes things I haven't done, things I ought to do, things I want to do, crazy ideas, super ideas. But I'd like to just be in the moment and relax a little bit sometimes.
That would be great. That would be wonderful. But I don't think that that's necessarily going to happen during meditation. I think that's a misperception of what the first couple of years of meditation practice might be like.
Hmm. So
And I
what
think
is what's a better expectation?
that you're going to be with your mind in a less judgmental way. All the stuff is still going to be there, especially for the first couple of years. Thoughts are going to come up. You'll have a million distractions, and that's completely normal. It doesn't mean you're not meditating right. You might be disappointed because you're not finding that sense of quiet or calm or relaxation that you hoped. But you actually have the opportunity to train a different muscle, the muscle of non-judgment. Your mind goes away, and instead of saying, "This is horrible, I hate my mind, I wanted things to be quiet, this means I can't meditate, meditation is terrible," instead of that reaction, you can try out saying, "Oh, my mind went away, bring it back. Oh, my mind went away again, bring it back to your breath or whatever else you're focusing on. My mind went away, bring it back. Oh, it went over there, bring it back." And if you can do the reps, maybe 100 times of that, you are getting stronger in at least two different skills. One of the skills is the ability to shift your attention. That is a very valuable skill. Most of us think about attention as just staying focused, but
Hmm.
it turns out that the capacity to shift your mind on purpose. Oh, my mind is here, I'm going to bring it over there. That is a very valuable skill, and it's associated with less depression, less rumination, less worrying. So that's a great skill to practice, and you can't do it unless you're distracted. If you don't have a distraction, you can't practice shifting your mind. So even though it might be frustrating, that is actually the rep. You notice your mind went away and you bring it back. And then you're also practicing the skill of non-judgment. Instead of judging yourself for being distracted, you're going to practice, even though it's hard, noticing that distraction as, "Oh, I got distracted, no big deal," bringing the mind back. And it turns out that that generalizes outside of those minutes when you're working on the meditation, the breath, to your everyday life, so that people feel less judgmental about themselves and less depressed in general.
Oh, that's good stuff. Okay, walk me through a couple more techniques. I'm liking this.
Great. Okay, so the mindfulness meditation is one of the most well-researched strategies to reduce self-criticism. Another one is called loving kindness meditation. It's very similar, but if you don't feel like paying attention to your breath or the sounds in the room, you can pay attention to repeating good wishes towards yourself. Now, this might sound really hokey, but the research evidence is super strong. So you get to choose your phrases. Common ones are like, may I be safe, may I be happy, may I be healthy, may I live with ease. Some people like, may I be peaceful, may I be content. You're not saying that you do feel these things, but this is kind of where you want to hang out mentally. And the idea is that you
Set an
repeat those
intention.
phrases.
Yeah.
Yeah, you repeat those phrases silently in your own mind over and over, and your mind will start to wander. You might forget that you're repeating the phrases. And then the workout is the same. You bring it back to the phrases. It's actually another concentration and attention practice, as well as nourishing kind feelings towards yourself.
So, people you've worked with, give me some examples of how this stepping away from the constant barrage of negative thought has changed their life. How about some success stories?
Well, I have many students who are really hard on themselves. They're athletes, they're perfectionists, or they have difficult relationships with a roommate, or they find themselves just, feeling cut off from other people. And this practice, especially during the pandemic, resulted in their feeling more connected with other people. And I heard some stories about improving, say, a roommate relationship where they didn't feel quite as agitated with the roommate. And there are variations on this practice where traditionally you actually offer those same kind wishes, not only towards yourself, but to other people around you, and then ultimately to all beings. So it's associated with better relationships. And then I've had some people talk about their perfectionism, their athletic performance, and how this practice made them feel not so hard on themselves. So that the point was, to have fun and enjoy the sport, not just to beat themselves up about, how well they were doing.
As a parent or a grandparent, in my case, are there some trigger phrases that I should be conscious about using around the little ones that I'm caring for?
Well, it is very important how you convey that you're treating yourself. When you make mistakes, it's a great opportunity to normalize making mistakes as part of learning and growth. It can be really tempting to just repeat phrases like, oh, I'm so dumb, or I'm such an idiot. And that's kind of a normal thing to say for a lot of people, but
Yeah, it
little
kind of
ones
just
really
rolls
soak it
off.
up.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So those little brains hear
Yeah.
that. Okay.
Right. But they can
So
hear the opposite. They can hear, oh,
that's,
I made a mistake. I'm going to learn how to do that. Let me try that again.
hmm.
Oh, I
Do,
burned the dinner.
yeah, so what, right?
Yeah, I guess I'll have to eat something else. I feel really disappointed. I was really looking forward to that. But I've
How do
learned,
we
something new.
how do we talk to kids about what their mental to do a check and see where are you at mentally with this? Are you what messages have already been implanted? Is there a way to kind of monitor that?
Yeah, I think that kids kind of understand that it can feel lonely in their own mind. And both kids and adults, I think, can think that they're the only one with so many thoughts and feelings running around. So I think just normalizing that is really important. And it's kind of helpful sometimes to give your own example. If you're talking to a kid, like, when I was growing up, I had this belief that I couldn't play sports, right? I was always picked last for every athletic team. And it made me think that, well, my body just wasn't for, sports, and I should just stop that forever. And I'm really sad that I felt that way. And I wish that I'd had people around me saying, no, everybody can get healthier and stronger, or, almost everybody, many, many bodies. And so now I try to talk to myself in that way. And I think the power of examples is that kids can kind of get that. And, you might hear them say, oh, I'm bad at this. I'm bad at that. And so it's nice for them to know that, well, just because you think that now, you don't always have to think that way. I mean, 4 or 5-year-olds, if you ask them, can you paint me a picture? Can you sing me a song? They're like, yeah. But once they get to be 9 or 10, it's full of like, oh, I'm not good at this. I can't do this. I can't do that. They've learned that only if you're phenomenal or the best in the class does your participation matter. So I think we can really counter that by modeling that, I just like to have fun with cooking, or, I like to go swim because I enjoy it. I don't need to be the best swimmer.
Have you done any research are you aware of research into what really top performers, top achievers, and how they speak to themselves?
Yeah, there's wonderful research on elite athletes and self-compassion. So I'll encourage you to dig into it if you want on Google Scholar or PubMed. There's usually a lot of visualization, visualizing yourself performing in the way that you would like to. And interesting research where the experimenters provided different kinds of mental training for how to relate to themselves, how to think about themselves, and then observed the effects. And it turns out that encouraging, kind self-talk is associated with better performance than that harsh, judgmental self-criticism.
So you want to establish the ability to be objectively aware of your performance, but in a non-judgmental way.
Absolutely. And so it's more specific and less personal to say, I'm going to adjust how I'm holding the tennis racket or the golf club than to think, I'm just bad at this, I'm terrible, I should give up.
Yeah, okay, I got that. Boy, we've been all over the board here, and I appreciate you just kind of going with the flow for me. What do you think is the key takeaway that you want people to understand about this whole concept of negative self-talk?
Well, I would want to just provide hope that the way that you relate to yourself isn't set in stone. The evidence shows that it can be changed, that you can become friendlier towards yourself and more helpful by practicing specific techniques that now have really solid, great research evidence supporting them, working for most people, and that there's not just one way to get there. So you can try out a few different approaches and see what you might like.
What are you working on next? Do you have another book in mind?
Well, lately I've been asked to speak to different audiences, and one of those audiences has been lawyers. So, it's a tough job. People are very self-critical. There's not a lot of room for mistakes. So right now I am thinking about different groups. I also have some work coming up for teachers, for educators, thinking about how to work these kinds of skills into just regular educational settings. So I'm just interested in all of these different audiences, and so I might see some more specific work in applying the skills for different contexts.
Okay, last question. If I see this in somebody I care about, if I see this trend toward being hypercritical and self-focused, how do I help? What can I do?
Well, it's tough because I think you want to communicate your care without seeming too critical, because people can really feel, ashamed or critical towards themselves for being so critical, and you can kind of get into a loop, right? I think it's really helpful to share anything from your own life that's worked. Like, I used to beat myself up all the time. I've been trying out this way of relating to myself, and I've noticed a difference. There's actually a few helpful strategies. Is that something that you would consider?
Yeah, your interest in health, I think, is just right on the money. I know a lot of people who start down the path of, oh, I've tried to lose weight so many times, or I've started out at the gym a million times, and I'm not, I've tried that, it doesn't work. And yeah, it's a very self-limiting thought. We say things to ourselves you'd never say to a good friend, and it's just amazing that we allow that to go on. So I'm glad you're researching this. I'm glad you share what you know today.
Thank you so much. Thanks for taking the time to speak with me and for your openness to considering these different ideas.